hexapods and myriapods. So now we're talking about insects, centipedes, and millipedes. Insects, I just want to point out how many of them there are, and that's not even, those are only the identified species for a couple of reasons. Exoskeleton is very supportive, and they can conserve water, they can fly, they have desiccant resistant eggs, they can metamorphose, and they have a really high reproduction potential. The myriapods have 4 classes. The diplopods are the millipedes. Chilopods are the centipedes. Symphyla are pseudocentipedes, and poropods are the soil bugs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those last two. The group as a whole means body consists of 2 tegmata and their uniramous appendages. Diplopods, millipedes, 2 pairs of legs per segment. That's huge. Usually round in cross section. They eat decaying plant matter, and they have repugnatorial glands. What that means is that if you ever picked up a millipede and done much smelling, they actually create cyanide through glands. It's a great defense mechanism. It works really well for them. Very few predators are capable of getting around it. Some of them actually can go in and eat around the gland and are able to consume them that way, but not many. The centipedes have 1 pair of legs per segment. They are flattened in cross section. So if you look at the millipede, which is chunky, versus the centipede, which is flat, you can see the difference. They are predators by nature, not eating decaying matter. These guys are hunting. They do courtship. Again, just like the scorpions and the spiders, the centipedes have toxins, and so you have to court. Males place spermatophores on a silk web, and the spermatophores picked up by the female. The other 2 groups I'm just going to mention in passing. These are the soil bugs and the pseudocentipedes. They are feed on fungus and eating decaying matter, thin, moist exoskeleton, so you would not mistake them as a millipede probably. These guys are in soil and leaf mold. They don't have eyes and also have a thin, moist exoskeleton. Hexapods, yay, insects. 3 tegmata, 3 body parts, 5 pairs of head appendages. So you're talking about things like antenna and mouth parts. 3 pairs of legs, so 6 legs. And their classes are considered the collembolans, the proturans, things that you're not going to be as familiar with, but they are not monophyletic. You're talking about insects. So, on the insects, we have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. The thorax can be divided into prothorax, a mesothorax, and a metathorax. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because insect dissection is necessary. Flight, can be divided into direct or synchronous flight. Muscles act at the wing base. Nerve impulse precedes each wing beat. And then indirect or asynchronous flight. So the muscle changes shape of the exoskeleton for both wing strokes. So the exoskeleton can actually flex and be resistant. And then 1 nerve impulse initiates up to 50 wing cycles. The fibrillar flight muscles require only occasional nerve signals to maintain contractions, so that's important. Other forms of locomotion include walking, running, and jumping. Mouth parts are very important on an insect because they have such a diverse food base across species, not necessarily within a species, but across species. So again, in dissection, you saw all these labrum, mandibles, maxilla, and labium, so I'm not going to go into them. They can be modified significantly to include something like the maxilla can be turned into a straw for sucking. Digestive tract, also seen in dissection, so I'm going to skip that. Trachea, kite and lined trachea are open through the spiracles. Tracheal trunks lead to the tracheoles, and then the tracheoles end intracellularly. So here's what we see. We see a spiracle leading into a trachea and then into tracheoles, which end on a cellular level. Circulation is open. They distribute nutrients, hormones, and wastes. Temperature regulation is required for flight. They have to be warmed up to a point before they can initiate flight. In order to get to that point, they can bask, they can quiver their flight muscles. They can't fly, but they can quiver them, or they can cool by seeking a cool place or a moist environment. Nervous and sensory functions are similar to other arthropods. They have a supraesophageal ganglion and a subesophageal ganglion. They also have a ventral nerve cord, and with that comes segmental ganglion. Sensory functions include mechanoreceptors, CD and stretch receptors, so they can tell when their shape is changing. They can hear. They have tympanums frequently on the surface, which are basically like eardrums on the surface, and Johnston's organs. Their chemoreception is typically quite good, and it can be not only on the mouth, but on the antenna and the legs. And for vision, they frequently have compound eyes with little ocelli coming in. So if you look at the eye, each one, this is a Drosophila eye. So if this is each one of these little things, little ones, is an ommatidia. And each one of the ommatidia picks up its own picture. And then all of those individual pictures from each of these little eyes is merged together as one in the brain. They also have So the compound eyes detect movement. They also detect UV light, which is what you see here. The difference between what we see and the difference between UV light. This is a bullseye pattern created under UV light. Ocelli are found on the head as well. Those are simple eyes. Those check differences in light intensity so they can determine photoperiod. Excretion, Malpighian tubules again. They transport ions, uric acid, water. They have the same name as the one in arachnids, but they're not homologous. Then there's a rectum. Functions of insect pheromones. I want to point these out because pheromones are very important in communication in many insects. Sex pheromones will send a signal and also attract the opposite sex. Really common for something like a moth, where they are very dispersed and they need to send a signal to the opposite gender that they are ready, and here's where they are. Caste regulating hormones, that's controlling in a social social insects, it's controlling the colony. Aggregation pheromones, those are controlling feeding or mating sites where they're all clumped together. Alarm pheromones are when there's a problem to warn others of danger. And trailing pheromones are for things like ants, where you see them little patterns, things like that. Reproduction, in terrestrial environments requires internal fertilization, so you can find very complex copulatory structures, and you can find things like sperm plugs going on so that another individual can't copulate with a female once it's already been done. There are some really interesting reproductive behaviors in insects. You can also find spermatophores, which are the little sperm packets going on, which is not at all complicated. Copulation happens in most insects, so it's internal fertilization. Pheromones are frequently set out, visual signals, auditory signals. It's common. Females may use an ovipositor. What does that mean? That means that she has a appendage that lays the eggs in a specific location. It may be under the epidermis of a leaf. It may be under the bark of a tree, but something that lays the egg. Development and metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is not all created equally. We're not going to worry too much about ametabolis. It's very uncommon, happens only in the Thysanura. Molting continues after adulthood, and adults and larvae are very similar except for sexual maturity. We are, however, going to look a lot at hemi and holometabolous metabolism. The couple key differences. In both cases, there's a specific number of instars between egg and adult, which is not the case with ametabolous. In hemimetabolous, immatures gradually take on an adult form, and they actually look kind of similar. So this is hemi. They look similar to the adults. In holometabolous, they look nothing like the adults, the larva. Okay. In hemimetabolous, immatures are called nymphs. In holometabolous, they're called larvae. Okay. Insect behavior. Social insects. Highly evolved in the hymenopterans and the isopterans. What does that mean? Bees and ants. And wasps. Okay. Oh, not really in wasps. Mostly bees and ants. Okay, so honeybees, what we have are queens, termites, that's what I'm missing. Queens, workers, kings, soldiers. So in bees, we have the workers who are doing all the nectar and pollen collecting, and they're taking care of the immatures. We have a drone, so a male from unfertilized eggs. We have a queen, and then we have royal jelly, which is fed to the larvae as the queen ages. The larvae develop into queens, and then those queens battle until one remains. And then that queen goes on mating flight. So she's released to make a new hive. These are what the different classes look like. A worker, a drone, and a queen. This one was marked by a researcher. So from us, we get wax and honey and silk and pollination from these individuals. We also get things we don't want from insects. I'm going to go through just a couple orders based on their relative importance. There are 30 insect orders, roughly. The beetles are holometabolists. They're about 40% of all insect species, which is a lot. Their first pair of wings are hardened completely into elytra. They have highly diverse feeding, and they can be pest species. Butterflies and moths, of course, have caterpillars. They can be pests or they can be beneficial. The flies, you can look over, and then finally the ants, bees, and wasps.